The sound of hammering echoed through the September morning air in Wickenburg, Arizona territory, as Theresa Fletcher drove the last nail into the fence post with 3 decisive strikes, each one landing exactly where she intended. She wiped the sweat from her brow with the back of her hand, leaving a streak of dust across her sun-bronzed skin, and surveyed her handiwork with satisfaction. The fence line stretched straight and true across the property her father had left her when he passed 6 months ago, and she had every intention of making the ranch profitable enough to keep it. At 23 years old, Theresa stood 5 feet 8 inches tall with shoulders broadened by years of hard labor and arms corded with muscle that showed whenever she rolled up her sleeves. Her dark brown hair hung in a thick braid down her back, and her green eyes held a determined gleam that had intimidated more than one man in town. She wore practical trousers instead of skirts when working the ranch, much to the scandal of the church ladies, but Theresa had long since stopped caring what anyone thought about her choices. She gathered her tools and headed back toward the barn, her boots kicking up small clouds of dust with each step. The ranch consisted of 200 acres of decent grazing land, a sturdy house her father had built with his own hands, and a barn that needed some repairs, but would serve well enough for now. She had 12 head of cattle and 3 horses, including her beloved mare Athena, a gray beauty with spirit to match her own. The sound of approaching hoofbeats made her turn, and she recognized Samuel Morrison riding up the path. Samuel was the youngest son of the banker in town, a man of 25 with soft hands and an easy smile that had charmed half the eligible women in Wickenburg. He had been calling on Theresa for the past 2 months, and she had accepted his attention with cautious optimism, hoping that perhaps here was a man who could appreciate a woman with strength and independence. Samuel dismounted with practiced ease, his fine leather boots hitting the ground softly. He wore a clean white shirt and pressed trousers, his hat tilted at an angle that suggested he had spent some time getting it just right before leaving town. His pale blue eyes swept over her work clothes and dusty appearance, and something flickered in his expression that made her stomach tighten. "Good morning, Theresa," he said, removing his hat and holding it against his chest. "I hope I am not intruding." "Not at all," she replied, setting down her toolbox near the barn door. "I was just finishing up some fence work. Would you like some water? It is hot out here today." "That would be kind of you," he said, but made no move to follow her inside. Instead, he stood there turning his hat in his hands, a nervous gesture she had never seen from him before. She returned with 2 glasses of cool water from the well, and they moved to sit on the porch in the shade. Samuel drank deeply, then set his glass down and cleared his throat. "Theresa, I have something I need to say to you, and I hope you will understand my position." The tightness in her stomach intensified, spreading through her chest. She had heard this tone before from other men, and she knew what was coming even before he spoke the words. "I have enjoyed our time together these past weeks," Samuel continued, not quite meeting her eyes. "You are a fine woman, intelligent and capable, perhaps too capable if I may be honest." "Too capable," she repeated, keeping her voice level even as anger began to simmer beneath the surface. "You must understand, a man needs to feel needed by his wife. He needs to feel that he provides something essential, that his strength and abilities matter in the partnership." Samuel looked at her earnestly now, as if explaining something she should have already understood. "When I see you handling everything on your own, fixing fences and breaking horses and managing this entire ranch without any help, it makes a man wonder what use he would be to you. What purpose would I serve in your life?" Theresa set her own glass down carefully, taking a moment to compose her thoughts. "I see. So my ability to take care of myself makes me less desirable as a wife." "It is not about desirability," Samuel protested weakly. "It is about the natural order of things. A man should be the provider, the protector. How can I be those things for a woman who does not need protection or provision?" "Perhaps you could be a partner," Theresa suggested, though she already knew this conversation was beyond saving. "Someone to share the burdens and the joys, to build something together rather than having one person dependent on the other." Samuel shook his head, standing and replacing his hat. "That is a lovely sentiment, Theresa, but it is not how the world works. I need a woman who will let me be the man, who will appreciate what I can offer rather than showing me up at every turn. My mother says it would be a disaster, that I would be the laughingstock of the county if I married a woman who could outwork me any day of the week." "And does your mother choose your wife, or do you?" The words came out sharper than she intended, but Theresa was tired of holding back her frustration. "That is not fair," Samuel said, color rising in his cheeks. "I am trying to be honest with you rather than leading you on. I thought you would appreciate directness." "Oh, I do appreciate it," Theresa said, rising to her feet and crossing her arms. "I appreciate knowing exactly where I stand and exactly what kind of man you are. You want a decoration, not a partner. You want someone to make you feel big and important, not someone to stand beside you as an equal." "You are twisting my words," Samuel said, backing toward his horse. "I knew you would react this way. You cannot accept that maybe, just maybe. The problem is not with all these men who have courted you, but with you yourself. Maybe if you were willing to be a little softer, a little more feminine, you would not end up alone on this ranch with no prospects." He mounted his horse before she could respond, tipping his hat with exaggerated courtesy. "I wish you well, Miss Fletcher. I truly do, but I cannot be the man you need, and you certainly are not the woman I need." Theresa watched him ride away, dust rising in his wake, and felt the familiar ache of rejection settle into her bones. Samuel was the fourth man in the past year to court her briefly before deciding she was too much, too strong, too independent. Before him had been Thomas Wright, the schoolteacher, who told her that no man wanted a wife who could best him at arm wrestling. Before that, Peter Johnson, the deputy, who said her skill with a rifle made him nervous. And before that, Marcus Webb, who owned the general store, who simply told her she was not what he was looking for without elaborating further. She sat back down on the porch steps and allowed herself 5 minutes of self-pity, staring out at the land she had worked so hard to maintain. The ranch was everything to her, the legacy her father had left and the proof that she could make it on her own in this harsh territory. But in her quieter moments, she admitted to herself that she wanted more than just survival. She wanted someone to share it all with, someone who would see her strength not as a threat, but as a gift. The 5 minutes passed, and Theresa stood, brushing off her trousers and heading back to work. The cattle needed feeding, Athena needed exercising, and the roof on the eastern side of the barn still had that leak she had been meaning to fix. Self-pity accomplished nothing, and she had learned long ago that the only person she could truly rely on was herself. The next week passed in a blur of hard work and careful planning. Theresa needed to increase her herd before winter, which meant going to the cattle auction in Phoenix. She prepared for the trip by setting aside money she had saved, arranging for her neighbor to check on her property while she was gone, and packing supplies for the 3-day journey. Phoenix was roughly 50 miles from Wickenburg, a distance that required careful preparation in September 1885, when the desert heat could still be punishing despite the calendar claiming autumn had arrived. She set out before dawn on a Monday morning, riding Athena and leading her pack horse, a steady gelding named Brutus. The road to Phoenix was well traveled enough to be relatively safe, though Theresa kept her rifle within easy reach and her eyes alert for any trouble. She had made this journey twice before and knew the locations where she could safely camp for the night. The desert landscape stretched endlessly in all directions, dotted with saguaro cacti and creosote bushes that filled the air with their distinctive scent. The mountains rose in the distance, purple and hazy in the morning light, and the sky arched overhead in a dome of brilliant blue. Despite the circumstances that made the trip necessary, Theresa felt her spirits lift as she rode. There was freedom in the open spaces, a sense of possibility that made her feel less confined than she did in town with all its judgmental stares and whispered gossip. She reached the first camping spot, a small spring surrounded by cottonwood trees, as the sun was setting on the first day. After tending to the horses and building a small fire, she ate a simple dinner of jerky and hardtack, washing it down with water from the spring. The night sky emerged in all its glory, stars scattered like diamonds across black velvet, and she lay on her bedroll staring up at the vastness of it all. "I am enough on my own," she whispered to the stars. "I do not need anyone to make me complete." But even as she said the words, she felt the hollowness behind them. She did not need someone to complete her, that was true, but she wanted someone to share her life with. There was a difference between need and want, and she was tired of pretending the want did not exist. The second day of travel passed uneventfully, and she made camp at another reliable water source. On the third day, she reached Phoenix in the early afternoon, giving herself time to find lodging at a respectable boarding house and clean up before venturing into town. Phoenix was larger than Wickenburg, bustling with commerce and energy that came from being a territorial capital. The streets were crowded with people of all types, miners seeking supplies, ranchers conducting business, merchants hawking their wares, and businessmen in suits discussing deals over cigars. Theresa checked the schedule for the cattle auction and learned it would take place the following morning. That left her with an afternoon to explore the town and a pleasant evening to rest before the business at hand. She walked through the streets, noting the new buildings that had gone up since her last visit, and the general sense of growth and optimism that pervaded the young city. As she passed the Silver Star Saloon, a commotion inside drew her attention. The sound of breaking glass and raised voices suggested a fight was underway, and people were hurrying toward the doors to either join in or watch. Theresa knew she should keep walking, that whatever was happening inside was none of her business, but curiosity got the better of her, and she moved closer. A man came flying backward through the saloon doors, landing hard in the dirt street. He was followed by two larger men, both clearly drunk and spoiling for violence. The man on the ground was tall and lean, wearing typical cowboy attire of work shirt, vest, and well-worn jeans. His hat had fallen off in the altercation, revealing dark brown hair that fell past his collar. He wiped blood from his lip and climbed to his feet with the easy grace of someone accustomed to fighting. "I told you, I do not have your money," he said, his voice carrying clearly across the street. "Jacob borrowed it without telling me, and he left town 2 days ago. I cannot pay his debts when I do not even know how much he owes." "That is not our problem," one of the drunk men slurred, advancing on him. "You are his brother, which makes you responsible. Pay up or we will take it out of your hide." "My brother is a grown man who makes his own choices, and I stopped being his keeper a long time ago," the cowboy said, standing his ground despite being outnumbered. "Now, I suggest you sleep off the whiskey and approach this with clearer heads tomorrow." The drunk man swung a wild punch that the cowboy dodged easily, but the second man came at him from the side and caught him in the ribs with a solid blow. The cowboy grunted and staggered but managed to land a punch of his own that sent the second man reeling backward. Theresa knew she should not get involved. This was not her fight, and these were not her people. But she had never been good at standing by when she saw something unjust, and 2 against 1 did not sit right with her regardless of the circumstances. She stepped forward, her hand moving to the knife at her belt. "That is enough," she said loudly, her voice cutting through the noise. 3 against 1 now that I am here. How about you back off and let this man alone?" The drunk men turned to stare at her, and one of them laughed. "What are you going to do, lady? This is not your concern." "I am making it my concern," Theresa said calmly. "I suggest you take the man's advice and sleep off the drink before you do something you will regret." The cowboy had straightened and was looking at her with an expression she could not quite read, something between surprise and concern. "Madam, I appreciate the thought, but you do not need to get mixed up in this." "Too late," she said, not taking her eyes off the 2 drunk men. "I already am mixed up in it." One of the men took a step toward her, raising his hand as if to push her aside. That was a mistake. Theresa moved faster than he expected, catching his wrist and twisting it sharply enough to make him yelp in pain. She swept his legs out from under him in the same motion, sending him crashing to the ground. The second man stared in shock, his alcohol-fogged brain trying to process what had just happened. "Anyone else?" Theresa asked, releasing the first man's wrist and stepping back. The second drunk man helped his companion to his feet, both of them now looking significantly more sober and much less aggressive. They muttered curses under their breath, but backed away, stumbling down the street and disappearing around a corner. Theresa turned to the cowboy, who was watching her with frank admiration. "Are you all right?" "I should be asking you that," he said, retrieving his hat from the dirt and dusting it off. "Though it appears you handled yourself just fine. Better than fine, actually." "Where did you learn to fight like that?" "My father taught me to defend myself," Theresa said. "He said the world was not kind to people who could not protect themselves." The cowboy extended his hand. "My name is Yates Carson, and I am in your debt for intervening, even though you probably should not have." She shook his hand, noting the firm grip and the calluses that marked him as someone who worked hard for a living. "Theresa Fletcher. And I probably should not have done a lot of things in my life, but I do them anyway." Yates smiled, and it transformed his face from merely handsome to something that made her heart skip unexpectedly. He had gray eyes that crinkled at the corners, a straight nose that had been broken at least once, and a jaw that was currently showing the beginnings of a bruise from the fight. He appeared to be a few years older than her, perhaps 27 or 28, with the weathered look of someone who spent most of his time outdoors. "Well, Miss Fletcher, since you saved me from getting thoroughly beaten by 2 drunks, the least I can do is buy you supper," Yates said. "If you have not eaten yet, that is." Theresa hesitated. She had learned to be cautious around men who showed interest, expecting the inevitable disappointment when they learned who she really was. But something about Yates Carson seemed different, though she could not put her finger on exactly what it was. "I have not eaten," she admitted, "and I suppose I could use some company, but you do not owe me anything. I helped because it was the right thing to do." "Even more reason to say thank you properly," Yates said. "There is a decent restaurant 2 streets over that serves an excellent steak. What do you say?" They walked side by side through the Phoenix streets, and Theresa was acutely aware of the figure Yates cut beside her. He moved with a confidence that did not tip over into arrogance, his eyes constantly scanning their surroundings with the alertness of someone accustomed to trouble. He asked her about her business in Phoenix, and she told him about the cattle auction and her ranch in Wickenburg. 200 acres is a good size for one person to manage, Yates observed. You run it yourself. I do, Theresa said, bracing herself for the usual reaction. My father passed 6 months ago and left it to me. I have been working to keep it profitable ever since. But Yates just nodded thoughtfully. That is hard work, especially in this climate. The heat alone is enough to break most people. You must be tougher than you look. I have been told I am too tough, Theresa said before she could stop herself. Yates glanced at her with a curious expression. Too tough? Is there such a thing? Apparently there is, she said, surprised to find herself being so honest with someone she had just met. I have been informed by multiple men that my strength and independence are unattractive qualities in a woman, that I make them feel unnecessary. They reached the restaurant, a clean establishment with gingham curtains in the windows and the smell of cooking meat wafting into the street. Yates held the door open for her, and they settled at a table in the corner. After ordering their meals, Yates leaned back in his chair and studied her with those steady gray eyes. Those men were fools, he said simply. Theresa blinked. Excuse me, the ones who told you that you were too strong. They were fools. Yates leaned forward, resting his forearms on the table. A man worth anything does not need a woman to be weak to make him feel strong. He finds his own strength and appreciates the same in his partner. The words hit her like a physical blow, so unexpected and so exactly what she had needed to hear that she felt her throat tighten with emotion. She took a sip of water to compose herself before responding. That is a refreshing perspective, she managed. Most men do not share it. Then most men are idiots, Yates said matter-of-factly. I have spent my life working alongside strong people of all kinds. My mother ran a ranch after my father died, raised 4 boys on her own, and never let anyone tell her she could not do it. I learned early that strength has nothing to do with gender and everything to do with character. Their food arrived, thick steaks with potatoes and beans, and they ate in comfortable silence for a few minutes. Theresa found herself relaxing in Yates's presence in a way she rarely did with anyone, especially men she had just met. There was something genuine about him, a lack of pretense that made her want to trust him. You mentioned your brother left town with debts, Theresa said. That must be difficult for you. Yates grimaced. Jacob has always been the wild one in the family. I love him, but he makes terrible choices and expects everyone else to clean up his messes. This time I cannot do it. I have my own life to build, my own plans to pursue. What kind of plans? I have been working as a ranch hand for the past 5 years, saving every penny I could, Yates explained. I have enough now to buy my own land, start my own herd. I was actually planning to look at some property north of here next week. Where north? Theresa asked with interest. Around Wickenburg, actually. I heard there is good grazing land available at reasonable prices, and the town seems to be growing steadily. Theresa felt a flutter of excitement that she quickly suppressed. It meant nothing that this man might be settling near her ranch. They had just met, and for all she knew, he was simply being kind because she had helped him. She should not read anything more into it than basic human decency. They continued talking through the meal and into dessert, discussing everything from cattle breeding to the best techniques for dealing with predators to their favorite places in the territory. Yates told her about his brothers, about growing up on a small ranch in Texas, before his mother moved them to Arizona after his father's death. He spoke of the hard years when they had struggled to survive, how his mother had refused to give up even when neighbors told her to sell and move back east where a widow belonged. She sounds like a remarkable woman, Theresa said. She was, Yates said, a note of sadness entering his voice. She passed 2 years ago. Pneumonia took her over the course of a week. She never complained, not once, just kept telling us to take care of each other. I am sorry, Theresa said softly. My father went the same way. One day he was fine, and less than a week later he was gone. They shared a moment of understanding. Two people who had loved and lost, and were trying to build something meaningful from what remained. When they finally left the restaurant, the sun had set, and the streets were lit by lanterns hung at intervals along the storefronts. Yates walked her back to her boarding house, and they stood on the porch talking for another hour before Theresa finally admitted she needed to rest before the auction. Will I see you tomorrow? Yates asked, his hat in his hands once again, though this time the gesture seemed less nervous and more respectful. I will be at the cattle auction in the morning, Theresa said. Will you? I had not planned on it, but I find my plans have suddenly changed, Yates said with a smile that made her heart do that skipping thing again. I suppose I should see what stock is available, even if I am not ready to buy just yet. Theresa smiled back, feeling lighter than she had in months. Then I will see you there. She watched him walk away into the night, his tall figure eventually disappearing into the shadows between lanterns. Only then did she allow herself to acknowledge the hope blooming in her chest, fragile and tentative but undeniably present. Maybe, just maybe, there was a man in the world who could see her strength and not be threatened by it. Maybe Yates Carson was that man. The auction began at 8 o'clock the next morning in a large corral on the outskirts of Phoenix. Dozens of cattle were penned in various sections, ranging from young calves to mature breeding stock. Ranchers and buyers from all over the territory had gathered, assessing the animals with experienced eyes and discussing prices in clusters of 2 or 3. Theresa arrived early, wanting time to examine the cattle before the bidding started. She had her eye on 6 young heifers that looked healthy and strong, good breeding stock that would help her build up her herd over the next few years. She was making notes in her small ledger when Yates appeared at her elbow, looking freshly washed and alert despite the early hour. Good morning, Miss Fletcher, he said with that warm smile. Sleep well? Well enough, she replied, pleased to see him. And please call me Theresa. Miss Fletcher makes me feel like a schoolteacher. Only if you call me Yates, he said, leaning against the corral fence beside her. What are you looking at? She showed him the heifers she was considering, explaining her reasoning for each choice. Yates listened intently, asking intelligent questions and offering observations that showed his own extensive knowledge of cattle. When she mentioned her price limit, he nodded thoughtfully. Those are good choices, he said. But have you considered those 3 over there? He pointed to another pen where 3 slightly larger heifers stood. They look about a year older, which means they would be ready to breed sooner. And see that one with the white face. She has the build of a strong mother. Theresa studied the animals he had indicated and realized he was right. She had overlooked them because they were in a different pen, but they were actually better suited to her needs than her original choices. Good eye, she admitted. I think you just saved me from making a costly mistake. Just returning the favor from yesterday, Yates said. Besides, I like seeing someone who actually knows what they are doing. Too many people buy cattle based on price alone without considering the long-term value. The auction began, and Theresa found herself caught up in the excitement of bidding. She managed to secure 2 of the heifers Yates had pointed out at reasonable prices, though the third went to another rancher who kept raising the bid beyond what she could afford. She also bought a young bull with good bloodlines that would serve well for breeding. Yates did not bid on anything, content to watch and learn the current market prices. After the auction ended, he helped her arrange for the cattle to be delivered to Wickenburg, dealing with the auction house manager while she handled the financial transaction. They worked together seamlessly, anticipating each other's needs without having to discuss every detail. That was exhilarating, Theresa admitted as they walked away from the corral. I love the energy of an auction. You did well, Yates said. Those animals will serve you well for years to come. He hesitated, then added, I was thinking, since we are both heading back to Wickenburg eventually, perhaps we could travel together. It would be safer with two people and the company would be pleasant. Theresa knew she should be cautious. She barely knew this man, and traveling alone with him could damage her reputation if anyone found out. But she was tired of living by other people's rules, tired of making herself smaller to fit into society's expectations. Yates had treated her with nothing but respect, and she was a good enough judge of character to believe he would continue to do so. I am leaving tomorrow morning at dawn, she said. If you are ready that early, you are welcome to ride with me. I will be ready, Yates assured her. Thank you, Theresa. They spent the rest of the day together, exploring Phoenix and talking endlessly. Yates told her about his years working on different ranches, learning every aspect of cattle management from branding to veterinary care. He spoke of his dreams for his own place, describing in detail the kind of ranch he wanted to build. I do not need something huge, he said as they sat in a small park watching people pass by. Just enough land to support a decent herd, with good water access and enough shelter for the worst weather. I want to build something that lasts, something I can be proud of. That is exactly how I feel about my father's ranch, Theresa said. It is not the biggest spread in the area, but it is mine, and every improvement I make feels like I am honoring his memory. He would be proud of you, Yates said with certainty. Keeping a ranch running alone is no small feat. You should be proud of yourself. Those words, simple and sincere, meant more to Theresa than all the flowery compliments she had received from other men. Yates saw what she accomplished and recognized the value of it. He did not try to diminish her achievements or suggest she needed help. He simply acknowledged her success, and that acknowledgement felt like water in the desert. As evening approached, they had dinner together again at a different restaurant. The conversation flowed as easily as it had the night before, covering topics both serious and light-hearted. Theresa found herself laughing more than she had in months, appreciating Yates's dry sense of humor and the way he could find something amusing in almost any situation. When he walked her back to the boarding house, he paused at the porch steps. Thank you for today. I know we only met yesterday, but I feel like I have known you much longer. I feel the same, Theresa admitted. It is strange how quickly you can connect with someone when you are both being genuine. Yates reached out and gently touched her hand, the briefest contact that nevertheless sent warmth spreading through her. I am looking forward to tomorrow's journey. Good night, Theresa. Good night, Yates. She watched him leave again, and this time the hope in her chest felt less fragile, more solid and real. They met at the stables as the sun was just beginning to lighten the eastern horizon. Theresa had already loaded her pack on Brutus and was saddling Athena when Yates arrived leading his own horse, a handsome bay gelding named Ranger. They worked in companionable silence, checking their supplies and preparing for the journey ahead. The ride out of Phoenix was quiet, both of them still waking up fully as the desert came to life around them. Birds began their morning songs, and small animals darted between the bushes seeking food or returning to their dens. The temperature was cool enough to be comfortable, though they both knew it would climb as the day progressed. As they rode, they fell into an easy rhythm, sometimes talking and sometimes simply enjoying the silence. Yates proved to be an excellent traveling companion, alert to their surroundings but not nervous, confident in his abilities without being boastful. When they stopped at midday to rest the horses and eat lunch, he shared some dried apples his landlady had given him, and Theresa contributed cheese and bread she had bought in Phoenix. "Can I ask you something?" Yates said as they sat in the shade of a large boulder. "Of course." "Yesterday you mentioned that men told you that you were too strong. How many men are we talking about?" Theresa sighed, picking at the bread in her hands. "4 in the past year, though there have been others over the years. The most recent was just last week, actually. A banker's son who decided I would make him look weak in front of his friends." Yates was quiet for a moment, his expression thoughtful. "Their loss. Maybe," Theresa said. "Or maybe they are right and I should try to be different, softer, more dependent, more like what men want in a wife." "Is that what you want?" Yates asked, turning to look at her directly. "To be someone you are not just to make a man comfortable?" "No," Theresa admitted. "But I also do not want to spend my whole life alone. Is it so wrong to want companionship, to want someone to share my life with?" Yates set down his food and shifted to face her more fully. "There is nothing wrong with wanting companionship, but you should not have to change who you are to get it. The right person will love you for exactly who you are, strength and all. And if that person does not exist, then those other men were right about one thing. You would be better off alone than with someone who makes you feel like you have to be less than you are." Yates paused, then added quietly, "But I do not think you will end up alone. I think there is someone out there who will be grateful every day for a woman who can stand on her own 2 feet and still choose to stand beside him." The intensity in his voice made Theresa's breath catch. She met his eyes and saw something there that made her heart race, a warmth and sincerity that spoke of feelings deeper than mere friendship. But she was afraid to hope too much, afraid to read more into his words than he intended. "That is a beautiful thought," she said softly. "It is the truth," Yates replied. "At least, it is my truth." They resumed their journey, and the air between them felt charged with unspoken possibilities. Theresa found herself hyper-aware of Yates's presence beside her, the way he sat his horse with easy grace, the occasional glances he sent her way when he thought she was not looking. She caught herself doing the same, memorizing the line of his jaw and the way the sun brought out auburn highlights in his dark hair. They made camp that night at the same spring where Theresa had stopped on her journey to Phoenix. While Yates tended to the horses, she built a fire and started preparing dinner. He joined her once the animals were settled, and together they cooked salt pork and beans, along with coffee strong enough to strip paint. "My mother used to say that coffee should be thick enough to float a horseshoe," Yates said, taking a sip and grinning. "This would definitely pass her test." "My father said the same thing," Theresa laughed. "I think it might be a universal ranching philosophy." After dinner, they sat by the fire as darkness fell and the stars emerged. The desert night was alive with sounds. The distant howl of a coyote, the rustle of small creatures in the brush, the crackling of the fire. Theresa wrapped her blanket around her shoulders as the temperature dropped, the desert's heat vanishing quickly once the sun went down. "Tell me about your ranch," Yates said. "What is your favorite part of running it?" Theresa thought about the question, wanting to give him an honest answer. "I love the independence of it, knowing that I am responsible for everything, that my decisions directly impact my success or failure. But I also love the connection to the land, the way each season brings different challenges and rewards. And I love working with the animals. Cattle can be stubborn and frustrating, but there is something deeply satisfying about seeing a healthy calf born or watching your herd grow." "You talk about it the way I think about it," Yates said, "like it is more than just a job. It is a way of life." "It is," Theresa agreed. "I cannot imagine doing anything else. Even when it is hard, even when I am exhausted and wondering why I am putting myself through this, I still would not trade it for anything." Yates nodded, staring into the fire. "That is how I know this is the right path for me. Even on the worst days, I still want to be out here working with cattle and land." My brother Jacob, he never had that feeling. He always saw ranching as a means to an end, a way to make money so he could go do something else. He never understood why I was content with the work itself. Is that why he left? Part of it. Jacob always wanted more than what we had, more excitement and glamour. He went looking for it in gambling halls and saloons, and you can see how well that worked out for him. Yates sighed. "I hope he finds what he is looking for eventually, but I stopped trying to fix his problems. I have to live my own life." They talked late into the night, sharing stories and dreams and fears. Theresa told him about the loneliness of running the ranch alone, about the mornings when she woke up and had to force herself to get out of bed because the work never ended, and there was no one to help shoulder the burden. Yates told her about the guilt he felt leaving the ranch where he had been working, even though he knew his boss understood and supported his decision to start his own place. Finally, as the fire burned down to embers and exhaustion crept over them both, they spread their bedrolls on opposite sides of the fire. Theresa lay looking up at the stars, aware of Yates's presence just a few feet away, and felt a sense of contentment that had been missing from her life for a long time. "Theresa." Yates's voice came softly through the darkness. "Yes, I am glad I met you." She smiled into the darkness. "I am glad I met you too." The next day brought them within sight of Wickenburg by late afternoon. As they rode through the familiar landscape, Theresa felt her nervousness growing. Soon they would arrive in town, and Yates would go his way and she would go hers. They would become neighbors at best, casual acquaintances who nodded to each other on the street. The connection they had built over the past few days would fade into polite distance. But as they entered the town limits, Yates turned to her. "Would it be all right if I rode out to see your ranch? I would like to see what you have built there." Relief and happiness surged through her. "I would like that very much." They continued past the town to her property, and Theresa saw it through fresh eyes as they approached. The fence she had repaired gleamed in the afternoon sun. The barn stood sturdy and proud, its new roof evident against the weathered wood of the walls. The house looked welcoming with its covered porch and neat yard. The cattle she had left behind grazed peacefully in the near pasture. "This is beautiful," Yates said, genuine admiration in his voice. "You have built something really special here, Theresa." She dismounted and helped him with the horses, showing him the barn and the paddock where her new cattle would be kept when they arrived. She pointed out the various improvements she had made and the ones she was planning for the future. Yates listened and looked at everything with the eye of someone who understood exactly what he was seeing. When they finally made it to the house, Theresa put coffee on to brew, and they sat on the porch watching the sun sink toward the horizon. The moment felt suspended in time, perfect and fragile, and Theresa was afraid to say anything that might break the spell. "I need to tell you something," Yates said finally, setting down his coffee cup and turning to face her. "And I hope you will not think I am presumptuous or moving too fast." Theresa's heart began to pound, but she kept her voice steady. "Go ahead." "I have been thinking about buying land near Wickenburg for months. I have researched the area, talked to people, made plans, but meeting you has changed everything. Now I am not just thinking about buying land near Wickenburg. I am thinking about buying land near you specifically." He stood and began to pace, his hands moving as he talked. "I know we have only known each other for 3 days. I know that is not enough time to make life decisions based on another person. But Theresa, I have never met anyone like you. You are strong and capable and honest about who you are. You do not play games or try to be something you are not." And when I am with you, I feel like I can be completely myself too." Theresa stood as well, her legs suddenly shaky. "Yates, what are you saying?" He stopped pacing and faced her, his gray eyes intense and full of emotion. "I am saying that I want to know you better. I want to court you properly, to spend time with you and see where this connection between us might lead. I am saying that when I picture my future ranch, you are there with me. And I know that is crazy because we barely know each other, but I cannot shake the feeling that I found what I have been looking for, and it is you." Theresa felt tears prick her eyes, overwhelmed by the honesty and vulnerability in his words. "I feel the same way. These past 3 days have been the happiest I have had in years. But Yates, you need to understand something. I am not going to change who I am. I will always be strong and independent. I will always want to work my own land and make my own decisions. If that is going to be a problem, we need to stop this before it goes any further." Yates crossed the distance between them in 2 strides and took her hands in his. "Do you not understand? That is exactly why I am falling for you. I do not want you to change. I want a partner, not a dependent. I want someone who will challenge me and inspire me to be better. I want someone strong enough to stand on her own but willing to stand beside me anyway." He paused, searching her face. "You are strong enough for both of us, Theresa. That does not diminish me. It makes us stronger together." The tears spilled over then, running down her cheeks as years of rejection and hurt were washed away by his words. "Say that again." "You are strong enough for both of us," Yates repeated, his own voice rough with emotion. "And I am grateful for every bit of that strength." Theresa launched herself forward, wrapping her arms around him and holding on tight. Yates held her just as fiercely, his face buried in her hair. They stood like that for a long moment, 2 strong people finding strength in each other. When they finally pulled apart, Theresa wiped her eyes and laughed shakily. "I must look a mess." "You look perfect," Yates said, brushing a strand of hair from her face with gentle fingers. "May I kiss you?" Instead of answering, Theresa rose on her toes and pressed her lips to his. The kiss was soft and sweet at first, tentative as they learned each other. Then Yates deepened it, his hand coming up to cup her face as he kissed her with a passion that made her knees weak. She kissed him back with equal intensity, pouring all her hope and longing and relief into the connection between them. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Yates rested his forehead against hers. "I should probably go back to town before it gets too dark, but I will be back tomorrow. And the day after that, and every day you will have me." "I will hold you to that," Theresa said, smiling through her tears. She walked him to his horse and they stood talking for another 30 minutes, neither wanting to end the evening. Finally, Yates mounted Ranger and looked down at her. "Thank you for taking a chance on me, Theresa Fletcher. Thank you for seeing me, Yates Carson." She watched him ride away, and this time when he disappeared from sight, she knew he would be back. The hope in her chest was no longer fragile or tentative. It was solid and real and growing stronger with every beat of her heart. The next several weeks passed in a blur of happiness. Yates came to the ranch every day, helping with chores and repairs while also looking at land nearby. They worked side by side, and Theresa discovered the joy of partnership she had always hoped for. Yates did not try to take over or act like he knew better than she did. Instead, he asked her opinion, respected her expertise, and contributed his own knowledge to their joint efforts. Together, they repaired the barn roof completely, replacing rotten boards and reinforcing the structure. They built new paddocks for the cattle that were delivered from Phoenix. They rode the fence line, checking for weak spots and made repairs where needed. And through it all, they talked and laughed and fell deeper in love with each passing day. Yates found a property bordering Theresa's ranch, 150 acres of good grazing land with reliable water access. He made an offer that was accepted, and suddenly, their future together became more concrete. They spent hours planning how to manage both properties, discussing whether to keep them separate or combine resources, debating the merits of different approaches to cattle breeding and land management. "We could connect the properties with a gate in the fence line," Yates suggested one evening as they sat on Theresa's porch watching the sunset. "Make it easy to move cattle between the two ranges depending on the season and grass availability." "That makes sense," Theresa agreed. "And we could build a lined shack at the far boundary of your property, give us somewhere to stay when we are working that section." "Listen to us, planning like we are already married," Yates said, then froze as he realized what he had said. Theresa's heart skipped. "Is that what you want? To get married?" Yates turned to face her fully, taking both her hands in his. "Yes. I know we have not been courting long, but I am more certain of this than I have been of anything in my life. I love you, Theresa. I love your strength and your determination and the way you never give up. I love how you treat your animals with kindness and respect. I love how you can outwork most men I know and never brag about it. I love everything about you, and I want to spend the rest of my life showing you how much." Theresa felt the familiar sting of happy tears. "I love you too, Yates. I love your integrity and your work ethic and the way you make me laugh. I love how you see me as an equal partner instead of someone who needs to be taken care of. I love that you challenge me to be better while also accepting me exactly as I am. So yes, I want to marry you." Yates let out a whoop of joy and swept her into his arms, spinning her around until they were both dizzy and laughing. He set her down and kissed her thoroughly, a kiss that promised a lifetime of love and partnership. "How soon can we do this?" Yates asked when they came up for air. "I do not want to wait long." "Neither do I," Theresa admitted. "But there are practical considerations. We need to figure out the details of combining the ranches, and you need to close on your property, and we should probably let people in town know what we are planning." "Fine," Yates said. "But I am giving you fair warning, Theresa Fletcher. I am going to marry you before the year is out." "That gives us just over 2 months," Theresa calculated. "Think we can manage it?" "I would marry you tomorrow if I could," Yates replied. 2 months is an eternity, but I suppose I can wait that long." They made their engagement official the next day, with Yates presenting her with a simple gold band that had belonged to his mother. Theresa wore it with pride, showing it to her few friends in town and enduring the shocked reactions with grace. Most people could not believe that Theresa Fletcher had finally found someone willing to take her on. The church ladies clucked and whispered, wondering what kind of man would marry such an unconventional woman. But there were some who understood. The widow who ran the general store congratulated them warmly, saying she had always known Theresa would find the right person eventually. The blacksmith, who had always respected Theresa's abilities, shook Yates's hand and told him he was a lucky man. And old Mrs. Patterson, who had known Theresa since she was a child, hugged her and said her father would be proud. Samuel Morrison, the banker's son who had rejected Theresa so recently, saw them together in town one day and stopped to speak with them. He looked at Theresa and then at Yates, and something like regret flickered in his eyes. "Congratulations on your engagement," he said stiffly. "Thank you," Theresa replied politely. Samuel nodded to Yates. "You are a fortunate man, Carson. I hope you know what you have got." "I do," Yates said, pulling Theresa closer to his side. "I am the luckiest man in Arizona Territory." After Samuel walked away, Theresa looked up at Yates with a mixture of amusement and satisfaction. "That felt good." "I bet it did," Yates said, kissing the top of her head. "But you know what feels even better? knowing that I get to spend the rest of my life with you." The 2 months before the wedding flew by in a whirlwind of activity. Yates closed on his property and immediately began making improvements. With Theresa's help, he built a small cabin to live in while they figured out their longer-term housing situation. They decided to keep Theresa's house as their main residence since it was larger and more established, but having the cabin gave them flexibility and extra space. They purchased cattle together, combining their resources to buy a larger herd than either could have afforded alone. Yates proved to be as good with money as he was with ranching, and together they made smart investments that would pay off in the coming years. They branded their cattle with a new mark that combined elements from both their previous brands, a symbol of their partnership. Theresa made her own wedding dress, a simple but elegant gown in cream-colored fabric. She rejected the impractical bustles and excessive frills that were fashionable, instead choosing a style that was beautiful but also comfortable and easy to move in. When she tried it on for Mrs. Patterson, the older woman's eyes filled with tears. "You look just like your mother did on her wedding day," Mrs. Patterson said. "Strong and beautiful and ready to take on the world." The wedding took place on a crisp November morning in the small church in Wickenburg. Theresa had expected only a handful of people to attend, but the church was nearly full when she arrived. It seemed that the story of her engagement had captured people's imagination, and many in town wanted to witness the marriage of the woman who had been rejected for being too strong to the man who loved her for it. Yates stood at the altar looking handsome in a new suit, his eyes locked on Theresa from the moment she appeared in the doorway. She walked down the aisle alone, needing no one to give her away, claiming her own future with every step. When she reached Yates, he took her hand and squeezed it gently, his love evident in every line of his face. The ceremony was simple and moving. They spoke their vows in clear, strong voices, promising to love and honor and support each other through whatever life brought. When the preacher pronounced them husband and wife, Yates kissed her with such tenderness that several women in the congregation openly wept. The reception was held at the ranch, with tables set up in the yard and food contributed by various neighbors. As the sun set and lanterns were lit, people danced to the music of a fiddle and guitar. Theresa danced with Yates, feeling lighter than air in his arms. "How do you feel, Mrs. Carson?" Yates asked, pulling her close. "Like the luckiest woman alive," Theresa replied. "And you, Mr. Carson?" "Like I finally found where I belong," he said, kissing her softly. They danced until the stars came out, surrounded by people who had come to celebrate their union. And when the last guest had left and they were finally alone, Yates carried Theresa over the threshold of their home and into their new life together. The first year of marriage was an adjustment, as any first year is. They learned each other's rhythms and habits, figured out how to navigate disagreements, and discovered the deep satisfaction of building something together. They worked hard, often from dawn until well after dark, but they worked side by side as true partners. Theresa had worried, in her most anxious moments, that Yates might change once they were married, that he might try to take over or make decisions without her, or gradually push her into a more traditional role. But those fears proved groundless. Yates continued to consult her on every major decision, to value her opinion as much as his own, to share the work and the responsibility equally. There were challenges, of course. A harsh winter that year tested their resources and their endurance. They lost 3 head of cattle to the cold despite their best efforts, and the feed they had stored ran dangerously low before spring arrived. But they faced it together, supporting each other through the hardest days and celebrating when they made it through. In the spring, they discovered Theresa was pregnant. The news filled them both with excitement and a bit of fear. They knew that raising a child on a ranch would be difficult, but they also knew they would face it the same way they faced everything, together. "I hope the baby has your strength," Yates said one evening, his hand resting on her still flat stomach. "And your kindness," Theresa replied, covering his hand with hers. The pregnancy progressed smoothly, and Theresa continued working as long as she was able, finally conceding to lighter duties only in the last few weeks. Yates was attentive and supportive, taking on extra work without complaint and making sure she rested when needed. On a warm September morning, almost exactly a year after they had met in Phoenix, Theresa gave birth to a healthy baby boy. They named him Daniel Arthur Carson, Daniel for Theresa's father and Arthur for Yates's father. The baby had Yates's dark hair and Theresa's green eyes, and both parents were instantly, completely besotted. "He is perfect," Yates whispered, cradling his son with infinite gentleness. "You are perfect. I cannot believe how lucky I am." Theresa watched her husband with their child and felt a completeness she had never imagined possible. She had spent so many years being told she was too much, too strong, too independent. But Yates had shown her that she was exactly right, exactly enough, exactly what he needed. And in doing so, he had given her the freedom to be fully herself while also being part of something larger. The years passed in a rhythm of hard work and quiet joy. They added to their herd gradually, building a reputation for quality cattle and honest dealing. Their combined ranch became one of the most successful in the area, proof that partnership and mutual respect could achieve more than domination and control. Daniel grew into a sturdy, cheerful child who loved the ranch as much as his parents did. When he was 3, Theresa gave birth to twin girls, Emma and Sarah, who kept everyone on their toes with their energy and mischief. 2 years after that came another boy, Thomas, quiet and thoughtful, who seemed to be studying the world from the moment he was born. Theresa discovered that motherhood did not require her to be weak or dependent. With Yates's support, she continued to work the ranch, strapping babies to her back when they were small and teaching them to help as they grew older. Her children learned early that both their parents were strong, capable people who worked together to create their life. When Daniel was 10, old enough to understand, Theresa told him the story of how she had met his father. She explained about the men who had rejected her for being too strong and how his father had seen her strength differently. "Papa said you were strong enough for both of you," Daniel said thoughtfully. "What did he mean?" "He meant that my strength did not take away from his," Theresa explained. "He meant that in a true partnership, both people can be strong. They do not have to tear each other down to build themselves up." "I think that makes sense," Daniel said. "You and Papa are both strong and you are stronger together." "Exactly," Theresa said, hugging her son. "Remember that when you are old enough to think about these things yourself. Look for someone who makes you stronger, not someone who needs you to be weak." The children grew, and the ranch prospered. Theresa and Yates aged together, their love deepening with each passing year. There were hard times, inevitable in any life, but they faced them as they had always faced challenges. Together, with strength and determination and unwavering support for each other. On their 20th wedding anniversary, Yates took Theresa back to Phoenix. They stayed at the same boarding house where she had stayed all those years ago and ate dinner at the same restaurant where he had first bought her a meal. After dinner, they walked through the city, which had grown considerably in 2 decades. "You remember that day I flew out of the saloon?" Yates asked, pulling her close as they walked. "I remember thinking you were going to get seriously hurt if someone did not intervene," Theresa said with a laugh. "I had no idea that intervening would change my entire life." "Best beating I ever took," Yates said. It brought me to you." They stood in the street where she had first defended him, and Yates took both her hands in his. "20 years ago, I told you that you were strong enough for both of us. That is still true, Theresa. Your strength has held us up through every storm, every challenge, every moment of doubt. But you know what I have learned over these 20 years?" "What?" Theresa asked, her voice thick with emotion. "That I am strong enough for both of us, too. We each have our own strength, and we each have moments when we need to lean on the other. That is what partnership really means. Not one person carrying everything, but two people sharing the burden and the joy in equal measure." Theresa kissed him then, a deep, passionate kiss that held 20 years of love and partnership and understanding. When they pulled apart, she rested her head on his shoulder. "I love you, Yates Carson. You changed my life when you saw my strength as a gift instead of a flaw." "I love you too, Theresa Carson. You changed my life when you showed me what real strength looks like." They stayed in Phoenix for 3 days, enjoying a rare break from ranch work and remembering the early days of their relationship. On the ride back to Wickenburg, they talked about the future, about their children's futures, about the legacy they wanted to leave. "Daniel is talking about starting his own spread when he is old enough," Yates said. "I think he has the skill and the temperament for it." "He does," Theresa agreed. "And the girls are already showing an interest in the business side of ranching. Thomas, I think, might become a veterinarian. He has such a gentle touch with the animals." "They are all good kids," Yates said proudly. "We did well with them." "We did," Theresa agreed. "We gave them what my father gave me and what your mother gave you, the skills to survive and the confidence to thrive." As they crested the hill that overlooked their ranch, Theresa felt a surge of satisfaction. The house had been expanded over the years to accommodate their growing family. The barns were well maintained and full of healthy cattle. The land stretched out in all directions, productive and beautiful. But more than any of that, she had built a life with a man who truly saw her, who valued her exactly as she was. The years continued to pass, marked by the changing seasons and the rhythm of ranch life. Their children grew up and began making their own paths. Daniel did indeed start his own ranch, with financial and practical support from his parents. The twins went to work for a cattle broker in Phoenix, using their sharp minds for business to great success. Thomas apprenticed with a veterinarian, and eventually opened his own practice in Wickenburg, serving ranchers throughout the region. Theresa and Yates became grandparents, delighting in the arrival of grandchildren who carried on the family tradition of strength and independence. They shared their story with anyone who would listen, hoping that by being open about their journey, they might help other young people understand that true partnership was built on mutual respect and shared strength. On a warm spring evening, when Theresa was 60 and Yates was 64, they sat on the porch of their ranch house watching the sunset. Their hair was gray now, their hands weathered by decades of hard work, but their love was as strong as ever. Theresa leaned against Yates's shoulder, feeling utterly content. "You ever regret it?" Yates asked. "Marrying a man who showed up with no land of his own and a brother's debts hanging over his head?" Theresa laughed and swatted his arm. "You know I do not. Best decision I ever made, taking a chance on that cowboy who got thrown out of a saloon. Best decision I ever made, letting you save me from those drunks instead of insisting on handling it myself," Yates replied, kissing the top of her head. They sat in comfortable silence for a while, watching the colors paint the sky as the sun descended. Finally, Theresa spoke. "Thank you for seeing me, Yates. For really seeing me, not who you wanted me to be or who society said I should be, but who I actually was. You gave me the greatest gift anyone ever gave me, the freedom to be fully myself. You did the same for me, Yates said. You showed me that being a man did not mean having to diminish someone else. You taught me that true strength comes from lifting each other up, not pushing each other down. The sun set completely, and stars began to emerge in the darkening sky. Inside the house, they could hear the laughter of grandchildren who were staying for the week, sounds of life and continuity and hope for the future. The ranch that Theresa had inherited and nearly lost was now a thriving enterprise that would continue for generations, a testament to what two people could build when they worked together as true equals. Years later, when their children and grandchildren gathered to celebrate Theresa and Yates's 50th wedding anniversary, Daniel stood to make a toast. Now a successful rancher in his own right with his own family, he raised his glass and spoke with the confidence his parents had instilled in him. 50 years ago, my mother met a man who changed everything for her. She had been told repeatedly that she was too strong, that her independence made her undesirable as a wife. But my father saw her differently. He told her she was strong enough for both of them, and in doing so, he gave her permission to be exactly who she was meant to be. Daniel looked at his parents, his eyes shining with emotion. You two taught us all something important. You taught us that love is not about making yourself smaller so someone else can feel bigger. It is about finding someone who celebrates your strengths and supports you in your weaknesses. It is about partnership and respect and building something together that is greater than either person could create alone. He raised his glass higher. To Theresa and Yates Carson, who showed us all what real love looks like, may we all be lucky enough to find what you found together. The room erupted in cheers and applause. Theresa and Yates stood, holding hands, their love for each other evident in every glance and touch. Yates turned to Theresa and spoke softly, his words meant only for her but perfectly capturing everything they had built together. Still strong enough for both of us, he said. Always will be, she replied, kissing him as their family celebrated around them. And as the party continued late into the night, with grandchildren dancing and great-grandchildren sleeping in every available corner, Theresa reflected on the journey that had brought her here. She thought about the young woman she had been, fixing fences alone and wondering if she would ever find someone who could accept her as she was. She thought about the moment Yates had flown backward through those saloon doors and how stepping forward to help him had changed the entire course of her life. Most of all, she thought about how Yates had given her the most precious gift of all, validation. He had looked at everything about her that the world said was wrong and declared it right. He had seen her strength not as a threat, but as a treasure. And in doing so, he had shown her that she never needed to change. She only needed to find the right person to appreciate her exactly as she was. The ranch continued to thrive under the combined management of their children and grandchildren. The land that Theresa had fought so hard to keep, and that she and Yates had built together, became a cornerstone of the community, known for its ethical practices and quality stock. But more than that, it became known for the story behind it. The story of a woman who was too strong for most men but exactly right for the one who mattered. Theresa and Yates lived to see their great-grandchildren grow, passing down stories and wisdom accumulated over decades of partnership. They watched as the world changed around them, as Arizona became a state in 1912, and the wild frontier of their youth slowly transformed into something more settled and civilized. But some things never changed. Their love for each other, their commitment to their family, and their belief that strength should be celebrated rather than suppressed. On a quiet morning in late spring, when Theresa was 73 and Yates was 77, they rode out together to check on a section of fence line at the far edge of their property. It was something they had done countless times over the decades, a routine so familiar it required little thought. The day was beautiful, warm but not hot, with a gentle breeze that carried the scent of wildflowers. They dismounted to examine a section that needed repair, working together with the easy efficiency of people who had done this 1,000 times before. As Yates hammered a new post into place, Theresa held it steady, just as she had on that September morning so many years ago when Samuel Morrison had ridden up to reject her. "You remember the day we met?" Theresa asked suddenly. Yates paused in his hammering and smiled. "Every detail. You came out of nowhere like some kind of avenging angel, putting those drunks in their place before they knew what hit them." "I remember thinking you had nice eyes," Theresa admitted with a laugh. "Even with blood on your lip and dirt on your face, you had kind eyes. And I remember thinking that if this strong, beautiful woman was willing to help a stranger, I wanted to know everything about her," Yates replied, setting down his hammer and pulling her close. "Best impulse I ever followed." They stood there in the sunshine, holding each other with the easy affection of a lifetime together. The cattle grazed peacefully nearby, birds sang in the scattered trees, and the mountains stood eternal in the distance. It was a perfect moment, crystalline in its simplicity. "I love you, Theresa Carson," Yates said. "Today, tomorrow, and for whatever time we have left, you are still the strongest person I know, and I am still grateful every single day that you chose me." "I love you too, Yates Carson," Theresa replied. "Thank you for being strong enough to let me be strong. Thank you for building this beautiful life with me." They finished the fence repair and rode slowly back to the house, savoring the spring day and each other's company. When they arrived, their daughter Sarah was waiting on the porch with fresh lemonade and news that another great-grandchild had been born that morning. A healthy baby girl named Theresa in honor of her great-grandmother. That evening, surrounded by family who had come to celebrate the new arrival, Theresa looked around the crowded living room and felt profoundly blessed. She had lived a long, full life filled with hard work and great love. She had proven that a woman could be strong and independent and still have partnership and family. She had found a man who saw her strength as an asset rather than a liability, and together they had built something that would last for generations. As the sun set on another day, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink and purple, Yates took her hand and squeezed it gently. No words were necessary. After more than 50 years together, they could communicate volumes with a simple touch. The years that followed were peaceful and productive. Theresa and Yates gradually stepped back from the day-to-day operations of the ranch, trusting their children and grandchildren to carry on what they had started. But they remained active and engaged, always ready with advice or assistance when needed, always serving as the foundation upon which the family was built. They celebrated their 60th wedding anniversary surrounded by 4 generations of family, a testament to the life they had created together. The party was held at the ranch, now run primarily by their grandson, with tables stretching across the yard and food enough to feed the entire town. People came from miles around to honor the couple who had become something of a legend in the region. During the celebration, Theresa's great-granddaughter, the young Theresa who had been named for her, approached with a question. At 15, she was beginning to grapple with her own identity and her place in the world. "Great-grandmother," she said, settling on the porch step beside Theresa. "Can I ask you something?" "Of course, dear," Theresa said, patting the girl's hand. "Everyone says I am like you, that I am strong and independent and do not care what people think. But some of the boys at school say that makes me difficult, that I am too much. Did you ever feel that way?" Theresa smiled, recognizing her younger self in this earnest young woman. Oh, my dear, I felt that way many times. There were years when I wondered if something was wrong with me, if I should try to be different. But then I met your great-grandfather and he taught me something important. What? Young Theresa asked eagerly. He taught me that I was not too much. I was exactly right, exactly enough. The problem was not with me, but with people who felt threatened by strength they could not control. Theresa squeezed the girl's hand. You are only 15, so you have time. But I promise you this. Someday you will find someone who looks at your strength and sees a gift. Someone who will say you are strong enough for both of you and mean it as the highest compliment. Until then, never apologize for who you are. The girl hugged her fiercely, and Theresa felt the satisfaction of knowing that the lessons she and Yates had learned would continue to pass down through the generations. Their story had become more than just their own. It had become a beacon for everyone who had ever been told they were too much, showing them that the right person would celebrate rather than suppress their true nature. As the celebration wound down and the last guests departed, Theresa and Yates sat together on their porch swing, a recent gift from their children. The night was clear and cool, perfect for sitting outside and enjoying the quiet after the day's excitement. 60 years, Yates mused. Sometimes it feels like we just met yesterday, and sometimes it feels like we have been together forever. Both are true, Theresa said, leaning her head on his shoulder. Every day with you feels new, but also like coming home. They rocked gently, the swing creaking in a rhythm that matched their hearts. After a while, Yates spoke again. You know what my favorite thing about our life together is? What? Theresa asked. That we never stopped being partners. Even now, when we are old and gray and have handed over most of the work to younger hands, we still approach everything together. We still consult each other, support each other, challenge each other to be better. That partnership is what made everything else possible. Theresa nodded, a lump forming in her throat. You are right, and you know what my favorite thing is, that you never once tried to diminish me. In 60 years of marriage, you never asked me to be less than I was. You only ever encouraged me to be more. Yates turned to look at her, his gray eyes still sharp despite his age, still full of the love that had sustained them through 6 decades. Theresa Carson, you are the best thing that ever happened to me. Loving you has been the greatest adventure and the greatest honor of my life. The feeling is entirely mutual, Theresa replied, kissing him softly. They sat on the swing until the stars came out, talking about their life together and watching the lights come on in the houses that now dotted what had once been empty land. Their legacy spread out before them, not just in the prosperous ranch or the successful children or the generations of family that bore their values and their names, but in the very way they had lived their lives. They had proven that a woman's strength was not something to be feared or suppressed, but celebrated and valued. They had shown that true partnership meant two whole people choosing to build something together, neither diminished by the other's brightness, but both shining more brightly because of it. They had lived a love story for the ages, one that started with a woman being rejected for being too strong, and ended with her spending 60 years with a man who said she was strong enough for both of them. As they finally rose to go inside, Yates steadying Theresa with a gentle hand at her elbow, they paused at the doorway and looked back at the land they had built together. The moon was rising, casting silver light across the familiar landscape, and somewhere in the distance, a coyote called to its mate. No regrets? Yates asked, as he had asked so many times before. Not a single one, Theresa replied, as she always did. You. Only that I did not find you sooner, Yates said, ushering her inside. But then again, maybe we found each other at exactly the right time. They closed the door on the cool night air and moved into the warmth of their home, hand in hand as they had been for 6 decades. Still partners, still in love, still proving every day that strength is not something to be hidden, but something to be celebrated when shared with the right person. And so their story continued, not with dramatic flourishes or grand gestures, but with the quiet, steady devotion of two people who had chosen each other and continued to choose each other every single day. Their love became part of the landscape, as enduring as the mountains and as constant as the desert sun. It lived on in their children, grandchildren, and great-grandchildren, a testament to what was possible when two strong people found each other and built a life on mutual respect, unwavering support, and the profound understanding that true love does not diminish either partner but elevates them both. The ranch prospered for generations, managed by descendants who carried the values Theresa and Yates had instilled. The story of how they met and fell in love became family legend, told and retold at gatherings and celebrations. Young couples would visit the old porch swing where Theresa and Yates had spent so many evenings, seeking inspiration from the love that had bloomed there. In their later years, Theresa and Yates moved into a smaller house that their children built for them on the property, leaving the main house to the generation actively running the ranch. But they remained vital and engaged, taking daily walks around the property, offering advice when asked, and serving as the beating heart of the family they had created. On the morning of their 65th wedding anniversary, Theresa woke to find Yates already up, standing at the window and watching the sunrise. She joined him, slipping her hand into his, and they stood together in comfortable silence as the sky transformed from gray to gold. 65 years, Theresa said softly. And I love you more today than I did yesterday, though I loved you plenty yesterday. Yates turned and cupped her face in his weathered hands. You were strong enough for both of us, Theresa, but you know what I finally understand after all these years. What? She asked. You were strong enough for all of us. For me, for our children, for our grandchildren and great-grandchildren. Your strength has been the foundation of everything we built, and I have been blessed beyond measure to stand beside it. Theresa felt tears well up, moved by his words even after all these years together. And your love gave me the freedom to be that strong. You made it safe for me to be fully myself. That is the greatest gift anyone could give. They spent the day quietly, just the two of them, reflecting on the life they had shared. Their children had planned a large celebration for the weekend, but this day was theirs alone. They walked the fence line they had repaired together so many times, visited the barn where they had worked side by side for decades, and sat on the original porch where Yates had first proposed. As evening fell, they returned to their small house and sat together on their own porch, watching the stars emerge. The ranch was peaceful, the cattle settled for the night, the day's work done. It was a moment of perfect contentment, the kind that comes only after a life well lived. Thank you, Theresa said, breaking the companionable silence. For what? Yates asked. For everything. For seeing me when others looked away. For loving my strength instead of fearing it. For building this beautiful life with me. For 65 years of partnership and love. Yates pulled her close and she rested her head on his chest, listening to the steady beat of his heart. The pleasure and the honor have been entirely mine, he said. You are, and always will be, the best thing in my life. They sat together as the night deepened, two souls who had found each other against all odds and had chosen each other every day since. Their story was one of strength and acceptance, of partnership and mutual respect, of love that grew deeper and richer with every passing year. In the end, that was their greatest legacy. Not the prosperous ranch or the successful children or the generations of family, but the proof that two people could love each other completely while remaining fully themselves. They showed that strength did not have to be sacrificed for love, that partnership did not require one person to diminish themselves for the other. They lived a love story that would be told for generations, a testament to the power of seeing someone truly and loving them exactly as they are. And every time someone in the family faced rejection or doubt or the suggestion that they were too much, they would remember the story of Theresa, who was rejected for being too strong, and Yates, the cowboy who said she was strong enough for both of them. They would remember that the right person will celebrate your strength, not fear it. And they would have the courage to wait for that person, knowing that true love requires no one to be less than they are, only more fully themselves. That was the happy ending Theresa and Yates wrote together. Not a fairy tale where someone was rescued or transformed, but a real story where two strong people found each other and built something beautiful that would last long after they were gone. It was an ending that was really a beginning, one that continued to unfold with every generation that learned from their example and chose love based on respect, partnership, and the celebration of strength rather than its suppression.